The struggles of other characters feel sidelined, underexplored, or undone at times. So we're focusing on Jax, but many of the people that Jax hurt, including Ribbit, don't receive the same depth or attention. That's especially frustrating because Ribbit seems like a genuinely interesting character. I would have loved to learn more about why she became so attached to Jax, why reaching him mattered so much to her, and why she viewed emotional openness as the ultimate sign of trust. Instead, most of the context we receive is about Jax and not her. As a result, Ribbit ends up feeling less like a fully realized character and more like an extension of Jax's story. Without additional context, she is ultimately remembered as the ex-girlfriend that he pushed towards abstraction. And I think that's a missed opportunity considering how much she meant to. Switch to C2, switch to relax mode with C2 green tea. His abstraction also falls short of expectations, not because it happens off screen. I honestly didn't mind that, but because the show spent so long building towards what feels like a slow burn redemption arc and never fully delivers on it. Jax never properly apologizes to the people he hurt, not to Gangle, not to Pomni, not to Ragatha. He never truly acknowledges the pain that he's caused or takes meaningful accountability for it. The show constantly hints that he wants to change, but every time he reaches a moment where accountability could happen, he doubles down instead or runs away. In fact, he openly acknowledges many of his flaws. He describes himself as a bad person and says that people shouldn't forgive him or care about him. I actually think it's an interesting portrayal of a deeply self loathing character. Even in the end, while hugging Pomni, he says he hates her. I understand that the scene is meant to imply the opposite, but it's interesting that even in that moment, he still can't bring himself to apologize or speak honestly. What's even stranger is that his final memories focused almost entirely on the good moments that he shared with Pomni. He doesn't seem to reflect on the ways that he hurt her or the rest of the cast, nor does he appear to remember the many times that people reached out to him and forgave him or welcomed him back despite everything. The absence of those memories in his last moments makes it seem like he doesn't actually feel remorse, but rather nostalgia for the few moments that he valued. As a result, the tragedy feels incomplete. The story wants us to grieve Jax, but it never gives him a clear moment of reckoning. Even a single scene where he openly recognizes the pain that he caused and tries to make things right would have gone a long way. What makes this stand out even more is how easily the other characters forgive him. Despite everything that happened, none of them seems to hold lasting resentment towards him. Most of them continue to care about him deeply, even without receiving an apology or closure. And this is why the resolution kinda loses me. If the intention was to give Jax a redemption arc, I don't think the story spent enough time showing accountability. But if the intention was that he never truly redeemed himself, then the universal forgiveness that he receives doesn't properly connect with everything that came before that. And this is even more noticeable when looking at the rest of the cast. Several character arcs end up becoming heavily tied to Jax in ways that, for me, weaken their own stories. Ragatha's emotional instability, for example, becomes heavily tied to him, and I'm saying this because in his flashbacks, Ragatha seemed emotionally stable. She spent time with Kinger, talked comfortably with Jax and Ribbit, and handled rejection surprisingly well. But after Ribbit abstracted and Jax rejects her help, her entire sense of stability suddenly collapses. Because of that, it almost feels like the show makes Jax the trigger of her trauma, which I think weakens the impact of her earlier backstory with her mother. Gengal's emotional climax and even Zubo's frustration also circle back to him. Gengal even apologizes because she can't cry for him. At a certain point, it starts feeling like the supporting cast exists primarily to react to Jax's suffering rather than pursue their own emotional journeys. I don't think my issue here is with Jax's character anymore, but with how the narrative treats everyone around him. Because sometimes it feels like the entire cast is written to understand him, forgive him, prioritize him, even when that doesn't fully align with their own experiences, personalities, and boundaries. Their reactions could have worked if the series had spent time developing a meaningful bond between them and Jax, but it didn't. Most of Jax's positive interactions happen only with Pomni. These characters have different values, different histories, and different limits. They're humans, and this is what the story itself is literally trying to tell us. So I'm confused and it's difficult for me to believe that all of them would arrive at essentially the same conclusion about Jax, especially when most of them only knew him at his worst. Omni Gangle and Zubul never knew that version of him from before everything fell apart. They mostly experienced the paranoia, manipulation, cruelty, and dishonesty. Yet they all ultimately respond with forgiveness and understanding. And you could argue that that's because they're good people. But good people are entitled to hold grudges when they've been humiliated and bullied repeatedly. I don't think holding a grudge or refusing to forgive someone would make them bad people. And even after we get the context for his behavior, I still think it would have felt more believable if at least one of the characters had chosen not to forgive him. Not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness and understanding are not the same thing. For me, that's where the story loses emotional realism. You cannot tell me that four women with entirely different personalities and values would all react the same towards a guy that manipulated them, lied to them, gaslit them, humiliated them, and never even apologized for it, just because he's suffering internally. Another issue is that the show slowly restructures itself around Jax. From episodes 1 through 5, the story feels ensemble driven. Then around episode 6, the entire emotional direction of the show changes. Pomni's role slowly shifts from main character to Jax's savior, and from that point onward, almost every major emotional or thematic reveal circles back to him somehow. Kingar's pillow fort was transformed to fit an abstracted Jax. The stargazing adventure was probably his idea, and we see it in his flashbacks. Everything we learned from Kingar about abstraction is used to tame Jax. Braga didn't talk about Rivet all along because she made a promise to Jax. Even Pomni's abstraction dream from episode 2 is foreshadowing to emphasize that everyone will save Pomni, but only Pomni will save Jax. And even though these are really good callbacks to earlier episodes, and it makes us feel like we've come full circle, they all happen to sustain Jax's journey only and complete his story. As a result, the show starts feeling less like a story about a group of people trying to survive together, and more like a story where everyone else's role and things we learn about them exist to support Jax's journey. And I think part of the frustration comes from the fact that the show never properly established Jax as the central emotional focus early on. For half the series, he's comic relief and background chaos. The fandom spent years theorizing that he secretly knew something important about the circus, or that he's actually a hacker because the show seemed to frame him suspiciously. But in the end, he doesn't know anything special. His keys are not connected to an exit or the circus, but to his own locked memories. He isn't tied to the core lore that we were exploring early on. He just has his own personal subplot that slowly overtakes the main narrative. And that's where the disconnect comes from. I'm not frustrated because Jax became important. I'm frustrated because the show spends half its runtime presenting one story and gradually shifted towards his story. If the intention was for Jax to be the central emotional focus, I think the series should have communicated that more clearly from the beginning. All in all, I like Jax as a character, but I don't agree with the narrative's desire to warp everything around him just so that the audience sympathizes with him. But hey, that's just my thing. Feel free to agree or disagree with me, and thank you so much for watching. Microsoft PowerPoint. Install and go. Pain is gone. The circus is dark. And somewhere beneath it all, in a pit of complete darkness, every single person who ever lost their mind in that place is still there. Kaufmo, Queenie, Rivet, Scratch. Every abstracted character the show has ever sent into the cellar, still existing, still present, just locked away in the dark where nobody can reach them. Until now. What if Kane being deleted is the thing that finally opens the cellar? What if the abstracted characters are about to come back, and what comes back isn't what anyone is expecting? To understand why this matters, you need to understand exactly what Kane's role in abstraction actually was. In episode 1, the show makes something very clear. Kane cannot cure abstraction. Yes, he can fix Ragatha's glitching. He can pull Pomni out of the void. But Kaufmo, once fully abstracted, gets sent straight to the cellar without a second thought. Because Kane can't fix him. The minds of the humans inside the circus are one of the few things he doesn't seem to have complete control over. Abstraction is what happens happens when a psychological state collapses entirely, and no amount of finger snapping reverses it. So all Kane can do is manage it, contain it. He opens a portal in the floor and sends them down. Every single time. For every single person who has ever broken in that place. The cellar isn't a cure, it's a storage solution, and Kane was the only one running it. Now he's gone. So what actually happens down there? Darkness calms the abstracted. In episode 3, in a flashback, we see Kinger and Queenie together in his pillow fort, dim, enclosed, away from everything else. Her jagged edges smooth out, her eyes focus. She becomes something almost tranquil, almost reachable, for just long enough for Kinger to feel her one last time. Then Kane drops her into the cellar, and Kinger watches. The abstracted aren't mindless because of what they became. They're unstable because of what surrounds them. The light, the stimulation, the constant exposure to input their fractured minds can no longer process. It overwhelms them. Put them in the dark, remove that stimulation, and something remains. Something that can still focus. Something that can still feel. And it isn't just Queenie. In episode 1, when Ragatha tries to calm Kaufmo by explaining herself, telling him she did find his jokes funny, that she was just having a bad day, his abstracted form goes directly for her anyway. Not randomly, not blindly, specifically. Whatever is left of Kaufmo recognized her, recognized the excuse. Something of the original person is still in there, still reacting, still processing, still responding to the people it knew before everything broke. The consciousness didn't disappear, it fractured. And underneath that fracture, in the pitch black of the cellar, with no light to overwhelm it and no Kane to keep the lid on, it's been sitting there, for years, for some of them, for decades. And now the lid is gone. There are several ways this could play out in episode 9, and none of them are simple. The first possibility is the most immediate. Without Kane maintaining the cellar as a sealed space, the portal he used to send them down might work in both directions. What comes up isn't a restored person. Abstraction is irreversible. The show has been explicit about that. But it isn't nothing either. It's something in between. Not who they were, not the monster they became in the light, but something the years of darkness have been quietly shaping into something new. Sa allergy nga, alam niyo, skin concerns could be caused by germs. Germs? We use new Safeguard Derm Protect. Derma-tested, fights germs, so skin barrier feels so healthy. Upgrade to Safeguard Derm Protect. Low on data? Don't sweat it. Get back online instantly and save up to 5% on low and mobile data promos when you buy on the Maribank app. Get up to 315 pesos on your first ever deposit when you download the Maribank app now. The second possibility is darker. The cellar wasn't just containment. It was the only thing preventing the abstracted from reaching the circus above them. Kane couldn't delete them, so he kept them down, kept them sealed. Without that seal, they don't wait. They don't slowly come back. They come up into a world that is already collapsing, with no Kane to fix the damage they cause, and no system stable enough to survive contact with them. The third possibility is the most interesting of all, and it depends on who specifically is in that cellar. Because it isn't just Kaufmo and Queenie. The very first person to abstract was Scratch, Kinger's colleague from C&A, the person who helped build the system that created Kane. He abstracted before anyone else, before the current group ever arrived, and he has been in the cellar the longest. If anyone has had time to stabilize in the darkness, if anyone still has the most complete understanding of what the circus actually is, it's Scratch, the person who built it, the person who went down first. And if the cellar opens and Scratch comes back in any form, the group doesn't just get a monster. They get the one person in the entire system who might actually know what's happening and why. Then there's Ribbit. The show never let us meet Ribbit properly. Only glimpses, only the door in the hallway, only the clouds in episode 5 showing a rabbit losing its tail while staring at a bow tie. We We know Ribbit abstracted before the show began. We know it cost Jax something he has never recovered from. And we know Jax has been in that circus refusing to feel it ever since. If Ribbit comes back, not restored, not the person Jax remembers, but present, real, undeniable, it isn't an adventure Jax can deflect with a joke. It's the thing he has been running from since before Pomni ever arrived. Every character in the current group is connected to someone in that cellar. Kinger to Queenie, Jax to Ribbit, and the group collectively, except for Pomni, to Kaufmo, who they held a funeral for in episode 2. A funeral for someone who was never actually gone, just locked below their feet the entire time. They grieved him. They processed the loss. They said goodbye. They moved on in whatever way the circus allows people to move on. And all of it happened while Kaufmo was right there, down in the dark, still present, still reacting to things, still, in some fractured way, aware. The official description of episode 9 says the cast discovers the truth about the digital circus and its history. The history. Not just what Kinger knows, not just what the C and A folder revealed, the full truth, the whole picture, everything the system was built to contain. What if part of that truth is the cellar itself? Not as a horror reveal, not as a monster of the week problem to solve, but as the answer to the question the show has been asking since Kaufmo went down in episode 1. What actually happens to the people? I panicked. I pushed her off me. She fell backwards. Get up. You're not looking too good. You're gonna cry. Looking like this. I'm a terrible person. I already know I am. So why does anybody still care about me? Not supposed to care. You're not supposed to miss me. You're not supposed to love me. This isn't how this is supposed to go. You're making me so much harder. I did this to myself. There's no coming back from this. I don't want to go. Jax might be just the best written character in the entirety of the amazing digital circus. Now, after a long 2 weeks, episode 9 of the amazing digital circus has finally been released on YouTube, and it's been getting the reaction I sort of expected after seeing it 2 weeks ago. People are loving the emotions, the twists, and the finality of it all. However, there's been a growing sentiment among people that don't seem to understand why Jax is so important to this finale, complaining that he's taking the spotlight from everyone else, that he's a terrible character for his actions, and that he does deserve the worst fate imaginable. And then you have those people who are the other extreme, those who baby Jax, completely disregarding his selfish actions because he's been through a lot, and attacking anyone who doesn't like Jax or thinks he's in the wrong, or because they personally like him. And in my opinion, I can't help but feel like everyone is wrong here. That's right, everybody is wrong here. You see, I asked a certain question almost a year ago now, that being, if Jax was such a narcissist, a bully, an abuser, then why do I still care about him? That's a question I feel has only become more and more relevant as the series' swan song arrived. But now that we have all of the pieces, I want to go back here and explain why exactly everyone is wrong about Jax, and in reality, why there is beauty in flawed characters. Hey guys, it's the Pink King here, and as you can probably tell, Jax is definitely one of my favorite characters to talk about, not because of who plays him or because he's a funny character, but more so because of the ultimate tragedy that lies within him. You see, Jax, ever since the beginning of TABC, has been incredibly nuanced. Someone who takes pleasure in others' suffering, a true dick unlike any other. He constantly pushes Gangle around, he antagonizes Zubul, and shows almost no compassion or empathy towards anybody, including himself. And while at first we don't really understand why and hate him for it, the more this series goes on, the more clear the reason why he is like this becomes clearer. He's someone with a lot of dark secrets, walls built up to keep everybody else out. Jax isn't really a person, but more so a mask, a facade created in order to self-project and hide away the real Leroy underneath. Hide him from a threat of which he made up in his own head. And this type of character is absolutely fascinating to me because this isn't as simple as, oh, he's a loner who hates people, but instead asks questions that leave you, the viewer, wanting to know more by design. Why did he build those walls? What secret is he trying to protect? What are his ethics if he understands what he's doing is wrong and yet still chooses to act on it? These are just some of the questions Jax, through visuals alone and well placed context clues, asks the audience. This is why Jax, as a character, holds the most potential for powerful writing out of almost everyone in the show. He leaves so many fascinating mysteries that all play off each other in really meaningful ways. Ways that you simply don't get with everyone else, who, unlike Jax, aren't as secretive. They are far more willing to put their trust in one another and share some of their most personal secrets with each other in order to lift them up when they feel at their lowest. But Jax can't do that. He can't trust anyone. He can't allow himself to be close to anyone because every time he tries to be vulnerable with someone, he only ends up hurting them in some form or another. And this is where the real tragedy to Jax comes into play because he, by all accounts, has the means to make meaningful relationships. He can connect with people, as we've seen with Pomni and Ribbit, but in the end, he chooses to either not or antagonize them because Jax comes from a broken home. Jax had an absent and toxic father who abandoned him and his mother, leaving his mother broken and to treat Leroy in one of the worst possible ways a mother could possibly raise her child. Constant belittling, ridicule, and mixed messages being sent that it's practically no wonder why Jax is such a nervous wreck. We understand why he is the way he is. We see how Jax was unfairly forced to become this sick individual, an individual who's confused and feels trapped within his own mind and body. Someone who, once shown the slightest bit of love, is left with no other choice but to lash out. Not for any selfish, hateful reason, but merely because all his life, that's what he's been subjected to. Every time he's opened up to someone like his mother, he's just had all of his vulnerability thrown back in his face or used to hurt him. The fact that he pushed his mother wasn't an act born of hate or violence, but more so born out of a coping mechanism forged from years and years of torment and abuse that he suffered. The writers behind the story understand why Jax is the way he is. They are able to show us why Jax isn't a irredeemable monster. He isn't as evil as we've been led to believe, but he is a human who's been a victim to forces beyond his control. And that's really powerful. But here's where things get lost, because in viewing his backstory, so many people have automatically thought that this is the show's way of trying to forgive Jax and redeem his character, trying to make us, the audience, feel bad for him so that we turn around and forgive his actions, when in reality, that's just not the case, nor does he deserve it. And this is why I loved the last act, because instead of trying to do any of that, instead of trying to make us forgive Jax when he in reality isn't deserving of it, what this episode does is use that emotional damage in order to add to the terrible person Jax has become. Because despite seeing all of what happened to him, despite knowing that Jax is a victim of so many terrible things, Jax, simply put, is not strong enough to be better from it. He, just like with a lot of people in reality, goes from a victim to an abuser. He learns all of the wrong lessons from his past, embracing the darkness and using it as a weapon against everybody else. Jax is a selfish coward who manipulated and tormented people who he even considered to be friends. He abused them, he hurt them, he left them feeling worthless, so much so that they couldn't take it anymore and abstracted, all because he was too afraid of them using his own weaknesses against him. Once again, his own mind created fake scenarios that weren't real. He invented his own enemy, and in doing so, made sure to be comfortable in being that terrible person. Jax is a awful human being. Someone who lashed out, abused, and broke his friends only to feign ignorance and hide away, letting everybody else deal with his aftermath. Which is probably why we don't see him abstract. It's just like if Jax had taken his own life, doing the same thing he's always done, making a big mess for everyone else to clean up while he disappears from responsibility. It's a deeply conflicted story, one of understanding and one of hate. Two very opposing sides that make sense once you put them together. But it's here where I believe that divide in the fandom in regards to Jax comes from, with people picking one side to this character psyche and judging him and the show off that one side rather than seeing the bigger picture at play here. And episode 9 used that picture to great effect by adding something to these two sides that I cannot compliment enough. And that's once again the humanity behind it all. Pomni is somewhat essential to Jax's story. She's the only one who's strong enough to get through all of the pain and anguish and miscommunication in order to see a brighter future. And that's probably why she and Jax work so well together. Because in this one moment, this one scene where we see Pomni risk it all in order to just talk to Jax goes to show what this has all really been about. Jax is not a good person. He is not someone who deserves a second, third, or even fourth chance. He's arrogant, bitter, and incredibly cruel when he never needed to be, but that doesn't mean he deserves to abstract. After all, we've all probably known someone at some point in our lives who was hateful, someone who tried their best to hurt everyone around them, to be self destructive in ways only a bomb can relate to. Just like in reality, there are many harmful people like Jax out there, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should just give up on them entirely. We shouldn't let these people continue to suffer or spiral out of control because in reality, everyone has a dark reason for acting the way they do. Sure, you can't forgive it, but that doesn't mean you can't try and help them find a new path. What this show does is highlight why people like Jax can't just be forgiven because of their past. After all, your past doesn't define you, it's what you choose to be, knowing it, that does. You can't just be forgiven for all of your heinous actions when so many other people have suffered just as much, if not more, and have turned out to be good. But on the same hand, that doesn't mean we should stop trying to help them either. Help them find a new meaning, help them process their trauma, help them try to be better, help to give them something they have never had before, compassion and empathy. And I think that's why Jax works so well here. He's someone complicated by design, broken by hardship, and prickly as a thorn, but he's also a human being. He's a person, and people are complicated by nature. People are imperfect, and instead of just allowing them to rot away and get worse on their own, it's always worth at least trying to make things better. Because if we don't try, then what was the point even to begin with?
Cheese Whiz has calcium that helps make your bones strong. Cheese Whiz for the strength to do more.
Is a strange character. He's an awful human being, but he's also deeply understandable. He's a character that's meant to be tricky to get and leave the
viewer with their own interpretations, and that's okay. It's okay to have flawed characters doing flawed things. It's okay to show characters act in ways that you might have not. It doesn't make the story or the people who made the story awful, a sentiment that I unfortunately feel like a lot of people need to hear now more than ever, given just how quickly people are to hurt creators or voice actors because they didn't agree with the morality of the character they made. Regardless of what role they serve to the story, stop trying to make these characters real people who should face real consequences for fictional actions. And instead, understand what they mean to their stories. Understand what lessons they're supposed to teach us and what impact they're supposed to have on the characters and world that they come from. Let characters be difficult. Because, as Kane put it himself, after all, it's their free will, not what made them alluring in the first place. But what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on Jax as a character? Do you agree with my sentiment, or do you have a different takeaway? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to subscribe. I'm trying to get 50,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and so any and all support is greatly appreciated. Plus, in doing so, it tells me that you guys really enjoy content like this, and you'd like to see me make more of it in the future. Also, before we go, I do just want to give a quick little thank you to the channel members. You guys are the reason I'm able to make these sort of videos, and it's because of your support that I just wanted to say thank you all so very much. And if you'd like to join these cool kids on the Wall of Awesomeness, then be sure to become a member of the channel today. You guys will get access to a bunch of special perks, plus you'll get your name shouted out at the end of every video, just like this. So if that's something that interests you, then be sure to become a member today and support the Pink Kingdom. But with that, peeps, it's been the Pink King here. Congratulations to Jax on her transition, and I will see you all next time.
Microsoft PowerPoint. Get it today.
Sarap! Ito! Kahit anong ipatong. Skyflix, asahan mo. Now that the Amazing Digital Circus has released its final episode, we finally know the entire backstory for Jax. Though a lot of what was said was very much in the implications. So I'm going to break down everything we learned about him in this final episode, as well as the character Ribbon. Now, when we first met Jax, he was kind of your typical jerk, and even the voice actor Michael Kovac didn't know very much about his backstory and portrayed him as more of a generic bully as a result. Unlike the others who seemed to still want to escape, Jack seemed to decide that being in the circus was where he belonged. Something that makes sense with the backstory we got for him in the finale, but which was also complicated by the character Ribbon. In the finale, we now know that Jax abstracts sometime after Kane left the circus. But Pomni tries to help him by entering the abstraction and seeing all the different versions of Jax that exist in his mind. These different versions of Jax have their own rooms inside of his head, similar to how all of the circus members have their own room in the circus. But what's interesting is that each of these different versions of Jax isn't some sort of complete personality of his. They're all just masks that he puts on in order to hide what he fears is the real him. This includes sociopath Jax, whose eyes go real wide when he's choking Pomni, reminding me a lot of the Gun episode where Pomni tried to act close emotionally to Jax, and he put on this act of being a sociopath to try and keep her away. He does the same thing when Pomni enters his mind and he tries to choke her, putting on the act that even if he can't actually hurt her inside of the circus, that he's a dangerous person that she should stay away from. A person who's even more likely to try and hurt you because he knows that he can't actually kill. In the next room that Pomni goes into, we see Maid Jax, the version of Jax that's forced to wear the maid uniform, such as we saw back in episode 5. This was something all the other characters voted to make Jax wear because they thought it would embarrass him. And while it clearly did at first, he then leaned into being comfortable with it so that people wouldn't suspect that his issues with it are much deeper than they first expected.
And then there's even just a room where he's basic Jax, the cartoony version of himself who just wants to do wild and wacky antics. This also just being a mask that he puts on so people don't realize what's going on underneath. It's in this third room where they imply that Jax sees himself as such a cartoony character in the circus because he's a bit reminiscent of Bugs Bunny. And you can kind of see Jax leaning into that personality throughout the entire show, treating the other characters like they're Daffy Duck or Elmer Fudd, people to set up for hilarious failures. After these three rooms, Pomni enters the final room, which has the three Jaxes sitting together, where they make it very obvious that they are just the mask that Jax puts on. One Jax, for instance, is very uncomfortable with the other Jax wearing the maid uniform. But the maid Jax reveals that the real reason they're wearing the maid uniform and really putting on this mask of being okay with it is so that people don't realize just how much this drives Jax crazy. And then, interestingly, in this room, there's a fourth Jax playing piano. One chained to the piano, implying that he represents the part of Jax that the masked versions of himself keep down. At the end of the scene, all of the different versions of Jax fade away, with the one who is chained up proving he represents the suppressed Jax by giving Pomni the key she needs to find the real one. But unfortunately, when she enters this door, what Pomni sees is the experience of Jax from his own eyes. This starts with the night he ran away from home, traveling in the dark, and then cuts to him camping somewhere, indicating he was living homeless for a short while. In the next shot, we suddenly see from Jax's eyes that he's now trapped in the digital circus, indicating that he stumbled upon the CNA office and put on the headset that scanned his brain. When he arrived, the only members of the circus were Kinger, Rivet, Ragatha, and Kafka, making for a very small group. And the really interesting thing we learn here is Jax didn't immediately embrace these masks in the circus. At first, he was just as freaked out as everyone else, but even after settling in, he wasn't treating it like a cartoony paradise the way he does in the pilot, seeing it as the best place to pick on other people without there being any real world consequences. And what's really sad is he doesn't actually adopt this until after seeing that there is consequences in the circus. When he first arrived, he made close friends with Ribbit, who was already close friends with Kafka. And unfortunately, in a lot of what we see, Ragatha seems to be the odd one out. When Kane creates a game for pairs of two, Ribbit was pairing up with Jax. And outside of those forced adventures from Kane, we mostly see Jax hanging out with Ribbit and Kafka, with Ragatha not being around. The problem was that Jax eventually got really close to Ribbit in particular, and when they started to spend some time alone together, Ribbit wanted to know about the regrets that Jax had in the world before, the world where they were human. Ribbit, of course, has her own regrets as she cut off contact with her Mormon family. The problem wasn't that they were Mormon, but devout Mormon, and Ribbit was not, to say the least. Ribbit doesn't say anything about her own identity labels or any clash they might have had with her parents, but that's a pretty big theme in the show. Zubul is, of course, non binary, and eventually, by the end of the series, in something of a relationship with Gang, with Ragatha also being hinted at having feelings for women, particularly common. And of course, there's the big revelations we get about Jax and his identity in this episode as well. The thing is, even if Ribbit didn't have identity issues or labels of her own, she was someone who seemingly took an interest in those ideas, and likely had a lot of friends like Zubul and Jax growing up. Because of their clashes on issues like these, and perhaps a lot more, Ribbit apparently cut ties when she moved out of her parents' home, but of course now regrets it and wishes she could have a chance to see them again. She uses this as a way to get Jax to open up, perhaps already seeing that Jax has some identity issues that he's not talking about. And unfortunately, that is exactly what Jax reveals to her. Not unfortunate because he was honest, but unfortunately because Jax wasn't in a healthy enough place to discuss this, and it led not just to the end of their friendship, but unfortunately also the abstraction of Ribbit. The problem a lot of the audience has is it wasn't very explicit in the show what exactly Jax's issues or identity labels were. But to be honest, I think leaving that a little bit vague at the end makes the most sense for Jax's character. Some people are very good with self labeling and self identification, seeing it as a way to share parts of themselves with other people that other people don't seem to understand yet. But for Jax, he grew up with people not wanting to really understand him in any way, particularly his mother and his father. That can lead not just to identity issues because your parents aren't accepting of who you might be, but also a discomfort with labels even if you understand who you are. This can feel safe as people around you may feel safe with the version of you that you present, which includes aspects of. Thank you.
Alam ni nanay na Colgate Maximum Cavity Protection ay may up to 24-hour cavity protection.
You might consider to be alternative, but which other people accept as just being you when you don't put some other label on top of it. And this can even be the more comforting baseline, even for people who don't have identity issues or issues with people around them accepting who they are. Every person has different things that bring them comfort. And because of that, even if Jax gets a strong understanding of who he is and all of that is separated from his parents, he still may not want to identify publicly in any specific way. Instead, continuing to just be himself and let people address him as they will. According to Jax, the issue started with his mother and father, who, as Jax explained, were always fighting. This led to the two becoming separated, and of course, Jax living with his mother and not very much seeing his father. It's in this time that his mother would take out a lot of her own issues on Jax. As a growing human in general, he's going to have outbursts, especially with there being tension in the family. And anytime that he would have something like an outburst, his mother would make it not about his issues needing to control himself as an adult, but about him being too much like his father, the person that she divorced and separated from, the person he recognizes as important to him, but doesn't really know because of how distant they are. But unfortunately, the opposite was also true. Anytime that Jax was doing something seen as a little too feminine, his mother would get upset with him and claim that he's not a real man, wanting him to also act more like his father. This wasn't even just about Jax's behavior, but to some degree, she was also missing what she liked about Jax's father, the parts of him that did make her want to marry him. And when Jax doesn't embody this, she sees him as less of a man. According to Jax, this went on for a while before eventually he told her something personal, thinking it would get her off his back. While it's not explained in the show, it strongly hinted that Jax is trans, or at least holds himself to have some sort of feminine identity. He could have told his mother something very complex and nuanced with the labels we have today, or he could have said something very simple, like saying he wished he was born a girl or that he felt like he was just born in the wrong body, gender wise. From here, however, his mother seems to go through the 5 stages of grief, starting off by getting really emotional and even insulting Jax, before seemingly making some peace with it and trying to give Jax a hug. And it's because of this whiplash of emotions that Jax ends up pushing his mother away. The episode gives us this very haunting image of Jax looking down at a body covered in static, the image of his mother, who he wasn't sure was still alive, causing him to run away, live homeless for a while, and eventually find the digital circus. What was really shocking to me was looking back at episode 1 and seeing that scene where Jax pushes Gangle over by the stairs. He was already a wacky and mean character, but this moment felt really intense, really brutal, really personal. And he was literally doing the same act that he thought was pushing his own mother, which led to her death. And to some degree, maybe this makes Jax feel comforted because he can push people however he wants here, and they won't die. But the problem is, they can still abstract, and he's doing this even after Ribbit and now even Kathmo have abstracted. This happened to Ribbit after Jax pushed her away for too long. A moment that reached its breaking point on some sort of snow adventure, where Jax finally makes it clear to Ribbit that they aren't going to be friends again. This is clearly a moment that, looking back, makes Jax feel a lot of pain. As even just seeing the image of this I spent